Keys to the Commonwealth, a podcast where we share the real stories of local community members who are using real estate to build personal wealth, along with tips and tricks from professionals across the industry. And now, your host, Landry Fields.
What's up, guys? Back for season 2 of the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. I am stoked for today's guest. Stephen is on the show with us today. Stephen, how are you?
I'm good. I slept well.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I've seen you around the social media platforms a bit, as you've got a unique following and unique niche that you usually are kind of dive into or an expert in. So before we kind of dive into that, tell me a little bit about your background. How did you kind of end up in the bluegrass?
Well, it's a long, meandering road. If I make it short, I am from Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
I grew up in Michigan my entire life, graduated from the University of Michigan, met my now husband shortly after graduating, moved to Arkansas for 2 years for grad school.
Okay.
I studied music. I have 3 total degrees, 1 in music ed and then 2 in music. I played the tuba, moved back to Michigan, and a few years later, after being married for a couple of years, we decided to move to Kentucky, where most of his family lives. They're all UK people.
There's got to be a reason you just don't just normally move to the bluegrass.
Yes, certainly was not a part of. I didn't grow up thinking one day I'm going to move to Lexington.
Yeah.
I had never really been to Kentucky, save for a couple of times, but we moved here. You know, it's not a brand new thing to me. We always came down here while we were dating.
Yeah,
and
so you'd already been here and seen the landscape and the culture. And
and my family is from the South, so like this is kind of a nice mixture of Midwestern and Southern. I think probably some Lexingtonians cringe at that, but when you go to where my family's from, like
that's deep South.
Yeah, it's very different.
I always say this feels like one of the northernmost parts of the South. Like it's definitely not, deep Southern, but there's definitely we still consider ourselves kind of like the South, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're going to go get sweet tea or iced tea, it's going to be sweet. And if it's not, you're like, wait a minute. So, and then you get to a little bit north of here, then that's when I feel like the accents change a bit.
Totally. Yeah. Cincinnati.
And so forth.
It's like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah. So you kind of moved down here and then, so you grew up in like Detroit Metro?
I started in Detroit. That's another long meandering story. I had a really interesting childhood, to leave it light. And so I moved around a lot.
Okay.
By the time I got to high school, I was in a fixed place for all 4 years. So I did go to high school in the suburbs, but I grew up on the east side of Detroit and various parts of downtown and just kind of all over.
I've never been to Detroit except for the airport. I've been to other parts of Michigan, Kalamazoo and stuff like that. So just never been in Detroit.
That's kind of like the difference between, Kentucky and Cincinnati. Like Western Michigan's a whole other
it's pretty thing. There's some very beautiful parts of it.
No, absolutely. Sure. If you ever get up north, that is the shining treasure of why anyone endures 6 months of gray and lake effect snow and all the things that, people kind of like are not that excited about, including me. Northern Michigan's gorgeous. And Western Michigan is too. There's a lot of beauty over there on
Lake Michigan. This is the furthest north I can ever live, I think, is Lexington personally. But
we'll go in the summer. I mean,
I need to
go in the summer.
For sure. So you moved to Lexington and then you have kind of created a niche as the, correct me if I'm wrong, the Kentucky land guy. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, more or less. I like the Kentucky land guy. I don't think I've ever called myself that, but that's 100. It's synonymous. It works.
Yep.
So I got into real estate about the time that I moved here.
Okay.
Leaving the whole music thing behind because of a series of just life and playing a very obscure instrument called the tuba. And not a lot of jobs to get out there. There's like 70 paying orchestral jobs in the entire United States.
Yeah.
So you live on freelancing, you live on teaching, you live on all these different things. And so I started the real estate thing. I really wanted to be able to have something that I could be passionate about. Like architecture doesn't particularly excite me. Like I like helping people and that's cool. But when it comes to houses, I'm not like, whoa, like look at this window. But being outside is something that I've loved even from the time I was a kid. I mean, moving in and out of the suburbs, wooded areas, playing creeks, going to day camps. My mom always was trying to keep us out of trouble. So we were always busy doing something. And I've just been an outdoor person from the time I was little through college into adulthood. So it's like, if I can find a way to sell land, and, maybe get more involved with hunters and kind of connect with like my own agricultural history from the people in my family, like that'd be cool. That was the general idea behind all of it.
Hunter as well, then I assume
brand new hunter.
Okay,
so that's something that's entirely new, like backpacking and all that kind of stuff. I've been doing that for a while. I've been hunting for like 8 months.
Okay,
been researching for about 2 years, but
I'm not a hunter. I've never really. I feel like a lot of guys we spend times outdoors, and it's usually, in my opinion, for one of three ways. Like we all do it, but it's just like either we're like these camper, hiker type people, like hunter type people, or golf.
I knew you were going to say golf.
But like in my opinion, I feel like we all spend outdoors, but it seems like that's what usually the three categories you fall into.
Yeah, I think that I agree. I think for me, I kind of put those first two together. Like camping and hiking were the introduction for me. And I got to this point in 2020 before COVID happened. I was like, I can do all this stuff outside to varying degrees, but I don't know how to like eat outside. Like I can go and I can tie knots and I can live outside for a week, for 2 weeks. I can't kill anything. I certainly am not going to even start touching the plants because then I just die. Like terrible like berry identification here. So
/ fishing, I guess that's just
exactly.
Which I've done that. So.
Like angling and hunting. So like the whole idea for me when I started getting interested in 2020 was just I would love to be able to combine the two activities. So like the entire in the hunting community, there's a sub community of backcountry hunters. So they're on the trail for however many days, and they're looking to get whatever game it is they're hunting. Oftentimes deer or elk or something like that, especially out west. It's huge. Here, it's not as, I don't know. It doesn't seem as prevalent. I don't know. Maybe it is, and I just don't know. There's a lot that I don't know.
I wouldn't know. I would not know. But so as the land guy, then, I mean, I'm very illiterate when it comes to obviously buying land. I'm honestly personally trying to buy probably like 20 to 40 acres this year is my goal with a business partner for some other stuff.
Like as one thing, or you're like you want a total of 20 to 40?
As one thing. Gotcha. So I've got some business aspirations that are more of a passion project that we're hoping to kind of do. Cool. Don't want to give too much away in that sense.
I get that.
But
I get that.
But yeah, so in that sense, like I really don't know when it comes down to land. Like obviously, I don't feel like a lot of, maybe there's some on just the Zillow, but it doesn't feel like you can just easily go to a Zillow or something like that.
Yeah.
And so having somebody that knows land, knows how the functionality with works with finding it, those relationships. And so forth like that. So definitely let's dive into that and that aspect. So
well, where do you want to start?
So like, I mean, I'm just a new client who's interested in having either a hobby farm or a plot of land for hunting or my other thing. I mean, what all goes into that as far as what you're kind of asking, what we're kind of, would need to be thinking about and so forth.
Yeah. So land becomes this is why I love it. It goes in so many different directions. You have a house, say this cup. I don't know if the cup is in the shot or not, but I have a cup sitting in front of me, and call that a house. A house has a primary purpose of living. Like it can be many different conditions. It can be many sizes, but like you look at a house and you're pretty much like, that's for people to live in it.
Yeah.
With land, everything that we do is on top of land, unless it's water. But whether that's a business or that's a house or that's a farm or that's a place where you're hunting or relaxing, there's so many uses. And the way that land sits, where that land is, what lies beneath that land, all of those things go into its value and into its feasible function, like what is feasibly possible to do on it. So like you mentioned farm, there aren't a lot of farms in Eastern Kentucky for really obvious reason. It's covered in mountains.
Yeah.
You don't typically grow large swaths of crops on an actual mountain.
Yeah.
It's
hard to build, hard to raise anything on it, hard to grow anything
right.
on
It's
it.
sloped. You try to grow something on a bunch of sloped stuff, you can't do it. Now, if you go out to like China or something where they have mountains, you'll see a very famous configuration of farming where they terrace the sides of these places because you need it to be flat, right?
Right.
But then you also need soil to be right. And, there's not a lot of incredible soil in mountainous areas. Every once in a while, you'll find some bottomland, or you'll find, these little patches of places where you can grow things. But that's just one example of like what is feasible and how the way the land looks relates to that feasibility.
Yeah. I mean, the cool part is it kind of like commercial sometimes where you can kind of think outside the box. You're dreaming about what it could be or what it could be to you or what your interest is in it. And so there's a big creativity aspect of it, which is why I'm interested in it for some things.
A lot of creativity, and depending on, the hill that you have to climb figuratively in order to realize whatever that dream is, it could be a lot of creativity and a lot of money. Because they'll say, oh, yeah, I can't build on the side of a mountain. It's like, well, if you go out to California, you'll see this Frank Lloyd Wright looking masterpiece that's built into a cliff. You absolutely can.
Yeah.
Can you afford it? That's the real question. So, your dreams are sometimes only as big as your wallet.
True. That's definitely true. Money helps when you have dreams and aspirations for stuff. That's for sure. Yeah. So as far as, let's talk to that about as far as land. Obviously, can be a large fluctuation, I assume, based upon location of where land is, 100%. Type of thing. But what are some of those main driving factors as far as, it's easy to get really used to looking at Zillow or home prices and see like this is what it should be selling for.
Yeah.
And we're pretty close to the ballpark typically. But land seems like it could be all over the place. So talk about that a little bit.
So, around here, some of your biggest influencers off the top of my head are going to be location. So we live in Lexington. We're recording here. Well, we're not technically in Lexington, are we? We're in Nicholasville. So Lexington is the horse capital of the world, is the people that you are often talking to in your show probably already know. And by virtue of that, if you're wanting land where horses are our primary agricultural product in this particular city, well, you're going to pay a really high price for that. When the horses are selling for $43 million and you've got 100 acres in Fayette County, you're not going to get that for the same 100-acre price of growing corn.
Right.
Someone's going to use that 100 acres for some horses.
And I feel like the whole horse farm is such a sub-niche community. I don't feel like I even know anybody, and it's like...
Well, it's very institutional from a family standpoint. It's very old. When you start going back to the days of the corn and cabin rights in Kentucky back in like the 18th century. Is it 18th? I think so. Anyway, people were growing tobacco out here, and then everyone had horses because that's the way that you got around. And then we discovered all these things about our limestone and bourbon and whatever. And all of those things rather relate to what makes it so special to even be here, what's so special about our soil. But in any case, between tobacco and horses, this was the place to be. And this is the horse capital of the world. No sweat on Churchill Downs, but Keeneland's that's the real gem of
100%.
Of it all.
If you're not from Kentucky, Keeneland's where it's at. It's much better experience.
It starts the thoroughbred racing season, and it ends. It is the bookend because
I always tell people if you're going to come to Kentucky to visit, you need to come April or you need to come October. One, the trees are always optimal at both those types months of the year. It seems like the jacket weather
though, in April, the pollen.
Yes, the pollen.
I've never been more allergic to anything than the state. Like it's brutal.
Which
sometimes.
Is, still baffles me why we have goldenrod as our state flower type of thing. Why we can't change that, I don't know. But so
location.
Location being one. Huge. Obviously it's price. Let's go from the standpoint of like there's not a structure building on it type of thing. It is what I think I'm thinking about.
100%.
For hunting or for developing or
so after location, even if it's not 100 acres, say that it's 20. The next just comes to demand. What you're going to pay price per acre, really anywhere around here, not just in Lexington, but anything that touches Lexington, you're going to pay a much higher price for something less than 20 to 30 acres. It kind of depends on the county, but under that 20 to 30 range, but maybe above 5 or 10, there's a premium for that.
Okay.
Everybody wants that. Everyone that wants land, I shouldn't say everyone, people that are otherwise not farmers, not in the horse business, they want that small acreage. And so what happens when you have a really big demand for something, but not a lot of it? Well, the price goes up, especially then when you're really close to, again, where everything is, the horse capital of the world / where most people work / where all the restaurants are / UK and healthcare and. So the other big influencer I would say is how much acreage you want. When you start getting beyond that 30-acre mark, again, that's dependent on the county, but you start getting beyond that, it's kind of like the Costco concept. Your price per unit goes down. The more you buy, the less it is per pound or less it is per whatever, buying that one bag of chips versus the 24 pack, you're going to save per unit. So acreage around here works very much the same. There are not a lot of people that want or need or can use 100 or 150 acres. Now, you still may end up paying bottom line more.
Yeah.
But when you start dividing that acreage down, it's going to be a lot less per acre for that.
Speaking to the large acreage aspect, has there been, it seems like there's been a bit of an uptick in the purchase of that size for the specific use case of leasing that land out to either farmers or others. Have you seen any of that or agree with that at all? Or maybe that's not Kentucky specific as much as it might be other more flat areas of the country in that sense. But
so the uptick I have seen is just people wanting to move here from other places.
Yeah.
In 2020 and 2021, I personally, but I know other agents for sure that have seen this, but I personally saw and sold more homes on acreage than I previously had sold because they wanted to be able to live a more country or rural or insert similar adjective.
I think we'd probably agree. COVID probably accentuated that idea that people wanted to kind of more or less kind of get away to where it was quieter. Or you're more can kind of create more of your own lifestyle with a quieter lifestyle type of thing in that sense, or have the freedom to kind of use your land and be
more self-reliant, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. My wife's wanting chickens so bad. I'm like,
really?
I'm like, we need to get a couple acres and then we'll add it or something like that. Like we're in just the neighborhood of like Lexington. I'm like, our immediate neighbors,
legal.
It's legal. My immediate neighbors have a chicken coops, but like our yard's not be able to be fenced in. And so I'm like, there's not a lot of room type of thing in that sense.
Chickens are high maintenance, in my opinion. I don't have chickens. I have 13 acres. And I don't have a chicken.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have an outdoor cat.
There you go.
I have an outdoor cat. He's pretty cool. But that's a different story for a different day. But as far as like specifically to your question of more people leasing to farmers, a lot of farmers lease land for sure. I could not speak to if there's more leasing going on. Does
that kind of fall more under commercial real?
No, not at all. It's just that like a lot of that stuff really happens. Agriculture is so communal when and I say that not speaking as a farmer, but just speaking as from the perspective of knowing a lot of them.
Yeah.
So if you are actively farming and that is like part of your livelihood, people in your community.
Sure.
And you know your neighbors and all that kind of stuff. Because if you've got cattle, I mean, sometimes cattle get out or a fence falls and, stuff like that. So leasing is often done the way that you might borrow sugar from your next door neighbor. People don't always involve a real estate agent in that perspective or in that situation. I will say with the diminishing number of farmers, just from a national standpoint, and certainly from, I would say, a statewide standpoint, people are farming less.
Yeah.
And a lot of that agricultural land here is being sold because, the generations after that farming family are not interested. They can't, they never learned how to farm. Farming is also really hard.
And I would say a lot of times to be successful, you have to have a whole lot more than you used to because to be profitable at the end of the day, I would assume, because of now you have technology and these tractors and things that you need a lot more land to be.
You need more Of a lot of things. You need more technology, you need more money. Oftentimes you need more than one job. I don't know very many farmers who farming is their primary occupation from an earning standpoint. They have to do other things. And then around here, even, again, you're not really farming crops in central Kentucky by and large.
Sure.
There are sections of little sub-regions of central Kentucky where you'll find a tobacco farmer, you'll find a corn farmer and stuff like that. But our largest agricultural activity, if you're going to be around Lexington, is horses. And even though we think of horse racing as a sport, it is absolutely an agricultural product. So now when you get out west, different story. That's where the end of the Corn Belt is. And when I say out west, I mean Western Kentucky.
Sure.
So Graves County, McLean, all that kind of stuff, they're growing corn. They have expansive 400, 500, 600 acre spots where it's, they're being profitable because of the soybeans they're growing and things like that. So
it definitely seems like it's been a big return since COVID too. Like I'm interested in like finding local beef, local chicken, local meat, the kind of, that's usually healthier for you at the end of the day and supports the local farmers and stuff like that, which I love.
Always a proponent of that.
So
I said always a proponent of that.
Yeah. And so that's been a cool aspect too, I think.
Yeah. And I think that there's been a bigger reach out for those local touches. I think COVID kind of put that conversation on an accelerator. I think COVID put a lot of things on an accelerator, but people liked buying local. We've had farmers markets here. We have we're pretty in touch with our agricultural side. But I think with COVID, it was like we're all at home and like businesses are faced with being shut down and not coming back. And it's like, no, I don't want Landry Fields' stuff to go under, or I don't want Mr. and Mrs. Smith's farm to go under. Like
security of assuming there's always going to be food at the local grocery with supply chains. Not being like, well, maybe there's this chance.
I think it made people more aware.
Yeah,
and it's awesome to see. And I think a lot of that momentum has really continued,
especially in the world of YouTube and everything like these days, right? Like I'm a big proponent of that. Like and that's a conversation for another day. But how drastically AI and the world of YouTube, et cetera, is going to be changing education. Like, and it has to. Like, I mean, if people are not aware of this or not focusing on how do we, what is important, like type of thing, you're going to be left behind in that sense. But the idea of like you can go and learn anything these days. Like, there's no excuse in that sense. Like, I don't have to like force my way to go over to a library and start doing a bunch of research and books. Sure. I mean, how many times have you looked up YouTube, I assume, to be like, I need to know how to do this, learn how to do this.
100%.
Learn how to do the podcast where we're doing right here. It's like you can learn anything. And there's such a big, I've seen on Reels like that, people just showing farm life. And I think that's become real popular. I even like watching them. You're like, it's kind of quieter sometimes.
It's very aspirational. I think there's a really big distinction between like living a little bit more agrarian or farm-like.
Yeah.
Half a century ago, most people were connected to agriculture in one way or another. 50 years before that, most people were farming in their own backyards to help provide for their family, even if they worked for larger farms. I think today, the idea of having a gentleman's farm or a hobby farm is cool, but it's also so distinctly different from running it as a business, which I'm always a stickler for. People say, oh, I want to buy a farm. And I always ask, being literal and not usually I'm not trying to condescend, but I'll say, what is it you want to grow? What is it you want to raise? Say, oh, I just want some land. I say, oh, well, that's not quite a farm. I think farmers work so hard. 2% of our entire population farms in this country. 2%.
Wow. Is it that low? And probably it was probably one of the main things back when.
Yes. 19th century, you're talking well over 60% of something related to farming or farming directly.
That's crazy.
So 2%. And so to own 50 acres is great. And it may be hard work to manage it, but it's not the same as growing something or raising something for the sustenance of 350 million people on this
that's a
country.
Whole nother topic for sure in that sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as like, so, back to, if I'm interested in buying land and stuff like that, obviously there's not traditional necessarily mortgages, and I'm not trying to necessarily speak to specifics about that. But, if there was a client, what would you be educating me on and how that's different between the rural kind of, what do they call that? Rural loans for rural land kind of a thing.
Are you talking about like the USDA loans and stuff?
Yeah. Those types of things,
Okay,
where it's specifically for farm.
So money works in a lot of different ways when it comes to land.
Raw land, I guess, is really what it is.
So if you're buying a farm, a legitimate farm, if farming is going to be your business, there are USDA programs, much like there's a USDA rural housing loan. USDA rural housing loan works all over the country. There are places such as Lexington that don't qualify for that rural area as seen by the government, but it's a government guaranteed loan, just like the VA, just like the FHA. That's just for houses. There are USDA loans for farms for when you are actually farming a piece of ground for a money-making purpose and whatever. And so you can get a loan like that. Again, that's something where you've then registered for, a farm ID, and you have a business plan, or you already have a history farming. If you're buying raw land,
almost like a business as far as the way that's
100% like a business, 100%. Then there are land loans, which will vary for most lenders, where you might even have an acreage limit, and it's probably going to be a balloon loan. So you're going to put 30, 35, maybe even 40% down. You're going to have a 10-year term, 7 to 12, whatever.
Yeah.
But let's call it 10. And you'll pay interest only. And then at the end of that 7 to 10 or 12, your entire principal is due. Now, you can overpay during that time or whatever, but that's how most land lending works around here, with the exception of two lenders. Can I give a shout out of the two lenders? Okay, I wasn't sure. Okay, so there's my favorite, Rural First. Rural First is an arm of the Farm Credit Mid-America. So many words. And so they lend money for land the way that people lend money for houses in a conventional way. So you can put 10% down, 15% down, or 20% down for a fixed rate. For 10, 15, or 20 years, respectively, which is pretty incredible. It's very much unheard of. Landline lending does a similar thing. They have $100,000 minimum, though. They have a little bit lower of a credit requirement from a score perspective, whereas Rural First, last I checked, because a lot of this fluctuates just given interest rates and the Fed and whatever, but Rural First, there's no minimum, but you do have to have a credit score minimum of 720 in order to take advantage of that 10, 15, or 20% down with a 10, 15, or 20-year term. So a lot of people, depending on the amount of land and their budget, a lot of people buy cash. I mean, that's a very common thing to do, because in some manners of speaking, you might spend $60,000, and that $60,000 may be, a down payment for another house. So sometimes people have that kind of cash laying around. When you start talking about $300,000 and $400,000 and $600,000 properties, most people are looking for some type of loan, especially if they're first-time land owners. They're usually borrowing money to make that happen.
Yeah, because I know for me, what I'm interested in, there's kind of the idea with the banks and those conversations with the banks where acquiring the land in a separate transactions from what I wanted to do / develop on the land would need to kind of be in two. It seemed like it was much easier to be done from two separate things. Acquire the land first, then work with the banks on kind of
That's usually my professional guidance for anyone, even when they want to build something. They're like, well, I want to get a construction loan. I'm like, well, are you really ready for that? Because in a construction loan, you need home plans. You need to know everything that's going to go into that house. You need to know who's going to build it, know if your lender is going to allow that person to build it and feels that they're not a risky person or risky business, or that they are insured and all that kind of stuff. It's much easier to get the land, maybe even pay on it for a couple of years and use that land then as leverage for your construction loan. Because a lot of times no one wants to really rush through the process of home design, choosing an architect. And most people, frankly, are not prepared for the amount of work that happens. So I usually suggest, hey, find where you want to build the house. You can think about how that house needs to look later. But if you are trying to do all of this stuff at once, you're likely to be overwhelmed and you're likely to be underprepared for how many things you actually need to have ready for a lender to say, yes, we will give you money for this loan and to build this house. Let's go. It's probably not going to be a smooth process for you, especially if you've never built the house.
100%. What are the different kind of zoning aspects or is there guidelines that have to be kind of we're talking, a lot of the rural counties around Kentucky and so forth? Are there aspects that play depending on what you want to do, whether it's farm, whether it's maybe it's a hunting ground, maybe you're renting out these, campsites now where people are building where they're coming to set up a tent camp, whether they want to set up like an Airbnb on it or versus live on it type of thing. Like what are the zoning aspects?
Zoning is, it's just varied.
Do you have to get it changed?
There are places that are completely unzoned.
Okay.
Where it's just like, as long as you're abiding by
paying your taxes,
general law, and not like storing like plutonium on your land, or using, your land to like do anything illegal, then it's kind of like you can build whatever you want. Yeah. Whereas when you get to some of the more established cities and towns here, like Mercer County, where Harrodsburg is, Harrodsburg has city limits. And then there's a lot of Harrodsburg that is Harrodsburg address, but is governed by different county rules versus like city rules. Yeah. And in those cases, their zoning is very, very spelled out, which I love. And here's the thing, it's not spelled out everywhere. Sometimes it's hard to find, and then other times it's just like very nebulous. But for them, agricultural land, it would be A1 is how they would label it.
Okay.
They list all the permitted agricultural activities, and under agricultural activities, hunting is permitted.
Okay.
Whereas if you are in Lexington, for instance, we have a urban services boundary, and then we have out in the country, like where I live, the rural services boundary. I am governed by the entire county and city, but I do have some different rules. Yeah. You cannot discharge a weapon for any other reason than self-defense inside the urban services boundary. If I wanted to hunt in my backyard or shoot clays where I live, 100% legal.
Okay.
So, and that's just an example of zoning. And then, agricultural uses are going to vary and be different counties, different incorporations. So, it really looks different everywhere. It depends on where you're building to ultimately say, do I need to change zoning or ask for a zoning variance, or am I just free and clear to like hit the ground running?
Because I know I've got a client in one of the counties surrounding Fayette County where they opened up, they basically they had a dwelling on it. So it was their home, but then they had enough acreage where they turned it into a wedding, wedding venue, like a barn and everything like that, which is more common these days. But it's like they had to get, that's not, sometimes we start thinking out of the box or becoming more creative with stuff, and the counties aren't ready for that. And I think they had to like change some of the
because now he's running a business. He's probably had to switch to some sort of B1, B2, or B3 type.
Go through that real quick as far as what those kind of common ones that, not all of them obviously, but just the common ones, like
common labels.
Common labels for like the land stuff.
So you've got agricultural, which usually has a few different gradations. You could have like agricultural 1, agricultural 2, sometimes agricultural residential. You could have residential, which has again several gradations. There's like R1, R2, R3, and those all have different rules. There's business zoning.
Right.
Business is typically where you're going to find your strip malls and things like that.
Yeah, that can be very, very between habitational or mixed use or all that stuff. Yeah.
But then also, if you live in a certain part of a county and you want to have a wedding barn, you may have to switch what was A1 to a B3 or something because of the amount of people your barn can hold, versus if you just had a place where people could take pictures and stand outside, you might not have had to switch it. So it depends on,
And those zoning qualifications are the same no matter if we're
they're not the same.
They're not the same. So when we're talking about Kentucky specifically, or we're talking
about literal different counties and cities.
Okay, so zoning. Okay, that's what I didn't know.
Zoning is not universal. Yeah, that's what I was saying about the whole like Mercer County. Like you can go hunting in A1, but where I live, where it's A1, I can't.
So you could have both have A1, but the rules that govern and dictate those A1 could be vastly
and that's why I was just going through like this whole list of what they're called, because what's
so just if you look at it and say A1, that doesn't really tell you all the details and information that
not
you need.
Even close.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be. It's intense, and so it's intense.
Which is why you need a land person if you're going to buy land. Because if you're like me and you don't know and you're trying to buy land, I mean, you could get yourself in some hot water there, and
you really could
buy something that you had aspirations to do. And which honestly, that's what part of my project of a passion project type of thing, where I've got to really dig through all that. It's based upon certain areas, certain guidelines, because it obviously, like you said, does change per county, per city versus non-city within the city limits type of thing. So
yeah,
it's a lot to work through in that.
It absolutely is. And then the further that you get out, the less technological things tend to be.
You don't say.
I've sold a lot of things in Wolf County, and I love Wolf County. It's gorgeous. It holds our prized possession, the Red River Gorge, if you've never heard of that. Of course, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to them.
Right.
Of course, but there, a lot of their stuff is not online, which you may say, oh, that's awfully millennial of you. But I mean, by and large, most land records and things are online. It's a 21st
so I'm in insurance, so I have to deal with the PVA all the time. And it's
so
like why we can't have a standardized PVA. That's a whole nother conversation. I think we just need to have a standardized blockchain PVA, but that's there's no way that's going to happen.
Now you're butting
quickly.
Up against democratic principles and who's voted for who and things like that, and who pays for what.
It makes sense to me, but I'm like, that's
a lot of PVAs are online, as you know, but like in Wolf County, to find land records, it can be very difficult to find those records digitally, or
sometimes, like we were talking about, even the specific boundaries of the plat of the land because it's been passed down.
And then certainly, what's the other, what we've been talking about? Zoning.
Yeah.
I can go and find Madison County zoning, whether it's countywide or just the city of Richmond, or if it's Paint Lake, like whatever. I can do that so easily.
Yeah.
Wolf County, it's like, I've got to call one of the sweet ladies down there and say, hey, would you mind helping me out? And just scan me a thing of what the A1 zone is. Like, I know what the zoning is, but I don't know what the zoning says. Like, I know what this property is zoned as, but I need to understand, what's permitted, what's conditional, what's prohibited. And, they'll do that for me sometimes. But that's phone calls. And then sometimes they're just like, no, you got to pay for that. It's like, oh, well, can I give you a card over the phone? It's like, nope, you got to come in, you got to go to the check. Like, I've done that. I've gone to Fleming County, and they didn't have any, at the time, they didn't have any sort of electronic way to pay. She says, well, honey, you can just, when you're up here, you can bring a check next time. And I'm like, that's awfully trusting, but I couldn't just do that over the phone.
Yeah.
I could sign up and they could give me a password, but
if anything, COVID helped realize that people had to start kind of playing in both spheres a little bit more, at least than they were. That's for sure. My biggest beef is PVAs, where you have to they want you to pay for every time you look. In Fayette County is easy enough, and Jessamine County is easy enough. It's like everywhere else outside that, they're like, no, I'm not paying a monthly subscription, so I can pull a couple PVA things each. That's me going on my soapbox.
I hear you,
but I know the feeling in that same sense. You're like,
I totally get it. I just, before I got here, I'm working on a listing in Mason County, which is on the Ohio River. For those of you not familiar, and to use their PVA, you can look up an address, you can see how big it is and what it sold for. You want to look at a map, you must pay money. And Mason County doesn't have their PVA set up such that you have a time limit necessarily. If you want the lowest subscription level, you're limited to 5 records. So if you want more than 5, you got to move up to a level. Yeah. And it's just those 5 records for the year. And I'm like, oh, man.
So if I'm looking for land, then what's the best places? Obviously working with somebody who does land like yourself, but what are some of the best places to be looking at if it's for sale, or is a lot of times it's just off the public listings, or is there separate
best place,
sites
on the computer, or best place geographically to go?
Let's go with both in that sense. We'll start with if I'm just researching on the computer, finding certain areas and looking for land.
I would say you can stay away from Zillow.
Yeah. Cause you can check mark the box to say lots or land, right?
Yeah.
But it's
Zillow just is,
it's not intended for that, really. I don't think
it's not really intended for it. And Zillow, here's the thing: when it comes to a lot of these vertical listing sites, Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, everything that they're getting on those sites, unless it's a for sale by owner, but everything they're getting from those sites is coming from a source. It's coming from a source of where some other realtor holds their membership.
Yeah.
It is much better to go onto that local MLS if you're really interested in staying on a system than going on Zillow. You might say, yeah, well, it's easier. It's like, well, do you want it to be easy or do you want it to be right?
Right. Something I've found even on Zillow, a lot of times, it's the land's not even for sale. And it was just still, it was sold and it's never been updated.
Because it didn't syndicate from go to the source. That's always my thing, whether it's a house or land. But then what sources are there? I'd say, CoStar, who owns they own apartments.com. They own LoopNet. They also own Lands of America, land.com. Like they own all these different things.
Yeah.
A lot of land specialists will put their stuff on Lands of America.
Okay.
Not all, but a lot of them will. And then there's a lot of mom and pop things that don't belong to MLS associations at all. And then some bigger things. An example of something bigger would be whitetail properties.
Yeah.
They are notorious for not being a part of MLS associations. They want complete control, understandably, of all of their listings, and they want it to be such that you have to call them in order to get more information.
Yeah.
And they want to keep as much business as
Which
possible.
is why, obviously, I would say it's more pivotal for somebody like yourself to work with in that sense, because there's just so many more variables as far as what's out there, how to find it, where to search for it.
There really are. I mean, between a place like Whitetail Properties, which I know a lot of those guys, and they're awesome, but the way they operate, they're like, we are independent of the MLS. Now, they'll put some of their stuff on Zillow, but they're independent. And then there's just like mom and pop stuff where they're like, we're not a part of an MLS.
I'm not familiar with Whitetail. Is that
Whitetail Properties?
Is that it's
national.
It's a national thing. Okay.
Whitetail Properties is owned by a guy named Dan Perez. He started it, I don't know how many years ago, but it's kind of hunting slanted, but they will sell things that are, like beautiful estates with a cabin on it, like a really nice cabin, or even sometimes I do see a home on there every once in a while, but they really skew toward the recreational side of land in general with some agricultural applications. And I can't remember what state they started in, but they are everywhere. They are absolutely everywhere.
I'll check that out.
Whereas, I can think of the Bruner Land Company. I don't know that they're part of the MLS or not, but they sell a lot of stuff in Harrison County, like Bourbon County, like kind of that bridge between Northern Kentucky, but we're not in Northern Kentucky yet.
Yeah.
But we're not really central. It's like, it's just weird.
There is a little bit of a void there in some respects once you get past Georgetown to get to Northern Kentucky.
Nicholas County is like there, but it's not really like
there's a large arc in case it floods, but that I don't know a lot more. But as far as locations, obviously it could be that could obviously be dictated by your preference and where it's located to an extent. But what have you seen as far as, especially people coming in, they're wanting to buy more land? Is there some kind of hot pocket areas or places that are kind of under the radar that
under the radar? I would say, I always say this: Madison, Clark, Harrison.
See, I thought Clark was an under the radar one too. I used to live a little bit in Clark County for a few years, Powell County before that. With
nice.
But yeah, I feel like Clark's kind of that last county where it's not really exploded like all the other ones have around the Fayette County. In that sense.
Contextually, I do not know why. I've asked this question to various people that are older than me and have been in the development business. I'm just like, what's the story there? Because if for folks that don't know, Clark County is east of Lexington or Fayette County, because Lexington and Fayette are the same thing. And running through Clark County is Interstate 64, which is one of only 2 entire interstates that we have in the entire state. Yep. So it runs right through this very wide county, Clark County, and ostensibly would be a great place to have development. It's the reason why a place like Georgetown has exploded. I-75 runs straight through Scott County. Yeah. And so it's like, great, easy to commute, easy to get to Lexington, all of that kind of stuff. Location. Clark County hasn't done that. And I don't know if...
Because you can definitely sometimes get into these family-controlled counties of sorts where they're just kind of like... Woodford's an extent. They really hold their cards close to the hand, right? In that sense, as far as what they want. I was like, but I've never heard... I don't know why either. It's like this mystery. It seems like to
Woodford
me with Clark County.
Clark County. Yeah. Woodford was more of a reaction to what was happening in Jefferson County. And they're just like, ooh, we don't want to be that way. And when I say that way, I don't want to be general. I mean, specifically, we don't want to be at a place where we're developing every which way.
They almost have a Fayette County urban service boundary mindset. It seems like within there.
Absolutely. But Clark County, it's...
I was at a talk the other day, and I was a big developer, and I know they were, there's definitely going to be a lot more, seems like restaurant and chains and kind of that kind of thing going into Clark County. So I think, there's a lot of people expecting that for sure in some respects, but that's a good opportunity, like you're saying, maybe with land or
Yeah, I think
where
so.
you can still get a pretty competitive price, I would assume, in some respects for things that you wouldn't necessarily get, especially in Jessamine County. Good Lord,
No.
trying to find land in Jessamine County.
I mean, it's basically accounted for.
Yeah.
For what isn't accounted for,
you're going to pay for it.
You're going to pay for it, and or it's not going to be. It likely won't be completely usable for whatever it is you want to use.
Yeah.
Everything that would have had houses on it, you're like, oh, I want to get in the development game and I want to build 100 houses. Well, good luck finding some place in Jessamine County where you can put 100 houses and it's not in a floodplain or it's not starting to become very ridgy or whatever. Right. Like that, Jessamine County is done. Like it's a wrap.
Yeah. And from the not to go off on a super boring topic, but from the insurance perspective, just remember that you can't insure dirt. So unless there's something on the land, like an actual structure, but you have liability type of thing. But physically, like I had somebody was like, "Can I insure the woods and trees and the woods on the property because maybe could be used for logging or something like that?" I'm like, well, unless you're a logger and that is your business, that would be something
you have to be doing. Other than that, agricultural for it to be a farm. Yeah, so you can get crop insurance, you can get timber insurance, you can get all kinds of insurance if that's the business you're running in order. So
just remember that. And so 100%. There's a lot of times we have to do vacant land type policies, or sometimes we can extend liability off of a person's homeowner policy,
like an umbrella kind of thing.
Well, umbrella, but we can just add a secondary location liability sometimes, assuming that it is a completely raw land, no structures, not even like a outhouse or fence type of thing of any kind, just like straight up nothing there kind of thing. So that's always a different conversation for sure. And but anything else to kind of topic of mind?
I think Harrison, Clark, and Madison are big opportunities for different reasons, but those are great places. And I often try to advise people. Sometimes people don't want to be advised, but that's my job.
Yep.
And I often advise them, though, that your purpose does not always equal the highest purpose. So the way that land is priced, or should be, if there's someone competent behind the listing and they know how to gauge price and how to calculate that, it's going to be price based on its highest and best use.
Okay.
So an acre of land on Richmond Road is going to be priced very differently than an acre of land even out where I live, because what do you have on Richmond Road? Traffic and opportunity for business. So that's going to go for millions of dollars, whereas an acre of land out where I live might cost you a couple hundred.
Yeah.
Or maybe not a couple hundred. I'm thinking of 10, but like probably 50.
Oh, yeah.
So, highest and best use is something that always has to be considered for land, because that is what will inform the price. Now, there may be multiple highest and best uses, but if your underlying purpose for buying the land is beneath those, then you're either going to pay a premium or you got to find something else to buy.
Yeah. So simple as that. To wrap up, I mean, what are some, now that you've lived here for how long? 7,
4.5
Oh, 4.5.
Yeah.
What's your kind of favorite thing about the state as a whole?
To be entirely predictable, bourbon. I started drinking bourbon long before I lived here, but I've developed quite the collection and knowledge about it. So I would say bourbon's.
It wasn't until I really got into it, I realized, and I started going on tours where I start figuring out, like, this is like the Napa Valley is the way I have to think about it. But a bourbon, in the sense that, like, I go to these, a tour, and I inevitably almost every time will be the only person from Kentucky on that entire tour, and you're like, you don't
95% of the country's bourbon, because bourbon's not just a Kentucky thing, but 95% of any bourbon ever made is made here. Yeah. So this is a destination. And then I'd say the second thing is the outdoors.
Oh yeah.
As much as I love Michigan, I will always love it. It's really hard to get to the really wonderful places. Most of Michigan, most of Michiganders, I'm going to use my hand, live here, or they live here. This is all in the Lower Peninsula, the Lower Peninsula and the lower part of the Lower Peninsula. Whereas if you go up here, I'm doing it backwards. Technically, it's that way. This is where you start to get all of the beautiful stuff. But to drive from here to up here, talking about a lot of time. And so to make a weekend trip out of going to like the northern coast of the UP, you're talking 9 hours on the road, sometimes even more, depending on where you're going and how good the road system is. Whereas here, I'm going fly fishing tomorrow. I'm going to drive an hour to do it.
Yeah.
I'll have cell phone service the whole time for work. And I love that. I absolutely love the proximity to the wilderness here.
Yeah, it really is. I think that's what's so beautiful about Central Kentucky, or some of the places that are being developed and so forth.
What's your favorite? You're from here.
Yeah, but it took me traveling out as an adult outside of the state more to really appreciate just the beauty, like the greenness of Kentucky. And I guess it's a weird way to say that, but like you go to other states, other places, and you're like, man, it really is very green. And it's like the bluegrass aspect. Maybe that's more Central Kentucky specific as a whole. But then, the fact that you can go over to the mountains, or you can go over more to the flatter plains areas, and kind of like there's so drastic aspects of the land and what you can do with it, type of thing. So, plus the 4 seasons and type of thing. Like I don't think I really appreciated that a lot of people don't have 4 seasons. Yeah. Really, truly.
Could you imagine a sunny, snowless Christmas? It's weird.
Or snow for like 6 months. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to at you or get a hold of you?
At me or come to my website. They're the same name, landandhomes.co. So there's no com, just .co. That's both my website, my Instagram handle. And if you want to find me on YouTube, I think that handle is just Land and Homes, because I couldn't, period punctuations were not allowed.
And what are you doing with that? Quick summary with the YouTube channel?
Oh, YouTube. I mean, there's hundreds of hours of me talking to people. Like, I would love to have you on my show, actually. Just hours of me talking about property ownership. So it's Land and Homes. I am SJBD Land and Homes. So it's both. And so we talk about home ownership. I talk about, all sorts of stuff. Land, cheapest land to find, cheapest homesteads to find, most expensive stuff to find, best counties for turkey hunting, for deer hunting. I talk to inspectors. I talk to loan officers and people that are much smarter than me about the economy, just to talk about what they think is going to happen or reactions to what has happened. So just a real catch-all for property. So if you're a buyer or a seller, there's probably something there for you. And then Instagram is just a little bit more of like,
got a new drone too, didn't you? Start to do some aerial stuff.
Nice. Yeah, going to be doing some aerial stuff soon. YouTube is kind of like my educational platform, I guess.
Hey, again, back to YouTube. Like, I don't know where I'd be without it. If I had that as a kid, I don't know. You could just learn anything. It would have been crazy.
Yeah.
I use it all the time now.
And ChatGPT.
It's going to be crazy. It is going to be nuts. So, Steve, appreciate you coming on the show, and we will check you all back next week.
Adios.
To learn more about this podcast, visit our page at keystothecommonwealth.com. To connect with Landry regarding insuring your investment portfolio, email Landry at novainsuranceGroup.com or call 859-687-2004.